Before my 73rd birthday party, my lawyer called and warned me, if anyone hands you any paperwork tonight, do not sign it under any circumstances. But what he said after that was what truly unsettled me. At the party, while everyone was raising glasses and celebrating me, my 9-year-old granddaughter suddenly disappeared. 2 hours later, a video call appeared on my phone. She was tied up in a dark room surrounded by kidnappers. Then they made demands that sent a chill down my spine. Because hours earlier, my lawyer had already warned me this might happen. Before we go any further, I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and entertainment. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lesson underneath is something worth carrying with you. There is a photograph on my desk. Eleanor, 20 years younger, laughing at something just outside the frame. Some nights I sit in front of it and ask her questions she can no longer answer. On the worst nights, I ask the one question I cannot stop turning over in my hands like a stone that never gets smooth. Did I deserve what happened? I still don't know. But I know exactly where it started. October 12th, 2024. My 73rd birthday. A party I never wanted thrown in a house that had been too quiet for too long, full of people I barely recognized anymore. It started there, and it started with her. Saturday evening. Vale Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. The caterers had taken over my kitchen by 4 in the afternoon, and by 7, the back terrace was alive with 60-some guests moving between the open bar and the string quartet Brielle had hired. Crystal glasses caught the garden lights, voices layered over each other in that particular way of people who are performing happiness rather than feeling it. I was standing in the east hallway with a bourbon I had no intention of finishing when Elliot Marlowe rounded the corner. Elliot had been my personal attorney for 18 years, precise, economical, with words constitutionally incapable of small talk. The fact that he had his jacket already buttoned at 7 in the evening told me everything I needed to know about the kind of conversation he wanted to have. "Happy birthday," he said, keeping his voice low. "Walk with me for a minute." "Elliot, it's my birthday." "I'm aware." He steered me gently toward the window alcove, away from the nearest cluster of guests. "I've been trying to reach you since Thursday. There's a filing something attached to the charitable trust structure that doesn't belong there. A transaction movement I don't recognize, timed in a way that should not be possible given the current board configuration." I frowned. "What kind of transaction?" "That's what concerns me. I don't have the full picture yet." He looked at me steadily. "But Gideon, if anyone tonight hands you paperwork, anything at all, a document, a consent form, something that looks routine, don't touch it. Don't read it, don't sign it. Call me first." I studied his face. Elliot was not a man who chased shadows. In 18 years, he had never once alarmed me without reason. But there were 60 people in my home, and Eleanor's favorite song was drifting in from the terrace, and I was tired in the deep, specific way of men who have been carrying too much for too long. "Monday," I said. "We'll go through it Monday morning." He held my gaze for a beat longer than comfortable. "Monday, then," he said quietly. "Enjoy your evening." He left through the front entrance, and I stood there another moment, rolling his words over in my mind before deciding firmly to set them down. Just for one night. Then I heard her. "Grandpa." Not a call, a declaration. Avery came around the corner from the dining room like a small force of nature, and her blue dress braids half escaped from whatever Brielle had carefully constructed. That morning, cheeks flushed from running, she grabbed both my hands and pulled with everything her 60-pound frame could generate. "You promised you wouldn't hide," she said, genuinely accusatory. "I'm not hiding. I'm having a conversation." "You were standing alone by a window with your sad face." "That is simply my face, Avery." "Grandpa," she tugged harder, laughing now, bright and unstoppable. "The cake is coming out soon, and Mrs. Price says you've been gone for 20 minutes, and everyone keeps asking where you are, and I told them you were probably thinking about something boring like work, and they all laughed, which means I was right." She grinned up at me, gap-toothed and completely certain of herself. "Come outside. Please, for me." Something in my chest cracked open in the best possible way. "For you," I said. "Only ever for you." She beamed like I had handed her the world and pulled me down the hallway toward the terrace doors, her small hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers, the way she had done since she was barely walking. The music grew louder. The garden lights blurred warm and gold through the glass. That was 7:38 in the evening. I remember the exact time because I checked my watch when we stepped outside, an old habit from 30 years of running board meetings. 7:38. Avery was beside me already calling out to someone across the lawn. At 7:40, a young woman from the catering staff touched my elbow. "Mr. Vale, I'm sorry to interrupt. One of the children went inside a little while ago, and I just want to make sure someone knows." I looked around. The terrace, the garden, the faces. Avery was not among them. "Avery!" I called toward the back doors, easy certain she had wandered to the bookshelf upstairs the way she always did. "Avery, come on back outside, sweetheart." Nothing. I went inside. Called again louder, checking the hallway, the sitting room, the staircase. The music behind me thinned as people began to notice. I moved faster, room to room, my voice getting rougher and higher in ways I could not control, calling her name until it didn't sound like a name anymore, just a sound desperate and raw, bouncing off walls that gave nothing back. "Avery." The library, empty. "Avery." The upstairs landing, empty. "Avery, answer me right now." I came back downstairs to the front hallway. The party had gone still around me, 60 people suspended in that terrible collective pause before panic becomes real. Someone near the kitchen said something urgent into a phone. A woman I didn't recognize had her hand pressed hard over her mouth. I turned. Brielle stood at the edge of the hallway, arch arms crossed loosely at her waist. Her face had drained to the color of old chalk. Every other woman in that room had her hands shaking her breath, coming in jagged pulls, her body already collapsing inward with dread. Brielle's hands were perfectly still. My daughter looked at me across that hallway, and something moved behind her eyes. Not panic, not the gutting terror of a mother who cannot find her child. Something else. Something carefully arranged. Something that looked from a distance exactly like grief. I would spend the next 4 days trying to convince myself I had imagined it. I hadn't. I told myself I was wrong about her hands. That's what you do when the alternative is unthinkable. You find the nearest reasonable explanation, and you hold onto it like a railing in the dark. Brielle was in shock. People process terror differently. Some people go rigid. Some people go cold. It doesn't mean anything. I told myself that, and then I turned back to the hallway and started shouting orders. "Get everyone outside." I said to the nearest security guard, a broad-shouldered man named Davis who had worked the estate for 4 years. "All guests off the property, now." Davis didn't hesitate. Within 10 minutes, the terrace was clearing, cars were pulling out of the circular drive, and the string quartet was packing up their instruments with the particular careful speed of people who understand they are no longer the point. I pulled Caleb aside near the base of the staircase. My son-in-law, 45 years old, silver at his temples, a man who had always struck me as someone performing competence rather than possessing it. He had his phone in his hand. "When did you last see her?" I asked. "Maybe 20 minutes before you started calling her name," Caleb said. He ran a hand through his hair jaw, tight. "She was near the dessert table, I think. Gideon, we need to—" "Who are you texting?" He looked up fast. "What? Your phone. You've been on it since the guests started leaving." "I'm trying to reach Brielle's sister. She might have taken Avery inside and not told anyone." "Brielle doesn't have a sister," I said. Caleb's mouth opened then closed. "Her cousin. I meant her cousin." He pocketed the phone. "I'm sorry, I'm not thinking straight." I watched him for a moment, that small stumble, that too quick correction, and filed it somewhere cold in the back of my mind. Davis came back with the head of my security team and led me to the monitoring room off the kitchen. 4 screens, 8 camera angles covering every entrance, the driveway, the garden perimeter, the side gates. "Walk me through the last 2 hours," I said. The security lead, a former state trooper named Grant, pulled up the footage, fast-forwarding in careful increments. 63 guests entering through the front gate between 5 and 7. Catering staff, florist quartet. Every face logged, every vehicle documented. "No unregistered entries," Grant said. "Nobody came in that wasn't already cleared. And exits? 14 guests left before 8. All confirmed departures." He paused, then said carefully, "Mr. Vale, there's no one on this footage who shouldn't be here." The room felt smaller suddenly. I pressed both hands flat on the console and stared at the screens. "Keep looking," I said. "Go back further. Look for anything, a door propped open, a camera angle that shifted, anything that didn't happen yesterday. I left Grant to it and went back to the main hall. Brielle was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, shoulders curved inward, hands pressed between her knees. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. "Dad," her voice cracked on the single syllable. "What did they say? The cameras?" "Nothing yet." I sat down beside her. "Brielle, think carefully. Has anyone contacted you in the last few weeks that felt off? Any phone calls, messages, anyone who seemed too interested in Avery's routine?" She shook her head rapidly. "No, nothing, nobody. Her school pickup schedule, her activities. Who outside this family knows those details? Dad, I don't know. People talk, the other parents at her school, her swim coach." She grabbed my arm. "We're wasting time. We should be calling the police right now." "We will. Gideon." Caleb appeared at the hallway entrance, voice strained. "Every minute we sit here is a minute she's further away from us." I looked at him. He was gripping the doorframe knuckles, white face carved with what appeared to be anguish. But his eyes kept flicking to his phone screen every few seconds, the way a man checks a flight status, not the way a father waits for his daughter. At 8:25, Brielle's phone rang. The sound cut through the house like a blade. She yanked the phone from her pocket hands, shaking now, genuinely shaking, and held it out to me, screen first. Unknown number. Video call. I answered it. Avery was on the screen. She was sitting against a dark wall, wrists tied loosely in front of her, with zip ties, eyes red and swollen from crying. The room behind her was dim, deliberately lit by a single lamp positioned to show her face and nothing else. She was still in her blue dress from the party. "Grandpa!" Her voice broke completely. "Grandpa, I want to come home." My throat closed, my chest, my hands, everything locked tight. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Then the angle shifted and a voice came through, electronically distorted, low and flat, stripped of any identifying quality. It said 3 sentences. $250,000, wired within the hour, and you do not call the FBI. Then, "Little Compass wants her grandfather. Don't make her wait." The call ended. I stood holding Brielle's phone, staring at the black screen. Little Compass. A name I had invented for Avery when she was 4 years old, because she always seemed to know which direction was home. A name I had never called her in front of anyone outside this family. Caleb moved immediately. "Transfer the money, Gideon. Right now, tonight. Whatever they want." "I need to call my attorney." "No." Caleb stepped forward, voice rising. "No attorneys, no phone calls. They were clear, you heard them. If you bring anyone in, she gets hurt. Do you understand that? Do you understand what they'll do? Lower your voice. Transfer the money." His voice cracked sharp and loud off the walls. "What are you waiting for? She's 9 years old. Gideon, she's 9 years old, and she's sitting in the dark somewhere, and you're standing here thinking." I reached for my phone. I was going to call Elliot. I had Elliot's number already pulled up, thumb hovering. Brielle dropped to her knees in front of me. "Dad." Her eyes were red, flooding over, voice stripped raw. "Please, please don't. They said if you call anyone, they'll hurt her. I can't." She pressed both hands over her mouth, shoulders heaving. "I can't lose her. Please, just do what they're asking. Please." I looked at my daughter kneeling on the marble floor of our family home. I looked at the phone in my hand with Elliot's number on the screen. I thought of Elliot's voice from earlier that evening. "If anyone asks you to sign anything tonight, don't." Then I looked at Brielle's face, and I put the phone in my pocket and wired the money. I want to be honest about that decision, because it was mine and I own it entirely. I am not a man who frightens easily, and I have spent 40 years making cold calculations under pressure, but I am also a grandfather. And in that specific moment, with Brielle's voice breaking apart in front of me and Avery's face still on that screen, every calculation I had ever made in a boardroom became completely irrelevant. You do not apply logic to the sound of your grandchild asking to come home. You simply cannot. I did not sleep that night. Brielle had gone to the guest suite sometime after midnight. I heard her footsteps on the staircase, slow and uneven, the walk of a woman carrying something she could not set down. I did not call after her. There was nothing either of us could have said in that hallway that would have made the next hour easier. I sat in the armchair by the bedroom window, with my phone face up on the armrest, watching the screen stay dark, willing it to ring. Down the hall, the guest suite light had been on since midnight. I could hear Caleb's voice through the wall, low, unbroken, steady. Not the sound of a man pacing the floor in desperation. Not the sound of a father cycling through every worst-case scenario until his mind went blank from exhaustion. It was the sound of a man running through a checklist. Around 2 in the morning, I walked to the hallway and stood outside their door. The voice paused. Then Brielle said something soft, and the call ended. I went back to my chair. By 6:30 Sunday morning, the house was pale gray with early light, and I had made myself a pot of coffee I was barely touching when the front bell rang. Helena Price, my house manager of 22 years, a steady, perceptive woman who had managed this estate through every difficult season our family had weathered, answered the door and came to find me in the kitchen. "There's a woman at the entrance, sir," Helena said carefully. "She says her name is Vivian Cross. She says Brielle called her." I had never heard that name in my life. Vivian Cross turned out to be a corporate attorney immaculately dressed for 6:30 on a Sunday morning, which told me she had not been called this morning at all. She carried a leather portfolio that she set on my kitchen table with the practiced ease of a woman who had done this many times before in many rooms that did not belong to her. "Mr. Vale," she said, extending her hand. "I understand this is an extraordinarily difficult situation. I'm here to help facilitate a resolution as quickly as possible." "Brielle called you," I said. "When?" "Last night after the initial contact from—" "What time?" A small pause. "Around 9 o'clock. Brielle had been sitting on my staircase at 9 o'clock, barely able to speak. I watched Vivian Cross open her portfolio and lay 3 documents across my kitchen table with the neat efficiency of a hand of cards. "These are the instruments that will need to be executed in order to satisfy the conditions being set," she said. "The first is an emergency proxy. This authorizes a designated party to cast votes on your behalf at any board meeting convened in the next 90 days in the event you are unable to attend. Standard language used in medical situations routinely." "This is not a medical situation," I said. She continued without breaking stride. "The second is a merger consent form, a preliminary agreement indicating your non-objection to a proposed acquisition discussion. It does not finalize anything. It simply opens the door." "Opens the door to what?" "And the third," she said, sliding the last document forward, "is a temporary trust suspension, a 60-day pause on the charitable foundation's operational activities while the board restructures, fully reversible." I looked at the 3 documents laid out in a row on my kitchen table. Then I looked at Vivian Cross. "You drafted all 3 of these this morning," I said. "I worked through the night." "No," I said, "you didn't." I picked up the emergency proxy and turned it over. The paper had that particular settled quality of documents that had been printed and sitting in a folder for more than a few hours. The ink on the signature lines was completely dry. "These were prepared before last night." Her expression didn't shift. "Mr. Vale, every hour you delay, get out of my house." "Sir, you can wait on the porch if you like," I said, "but you are done presenting documents at my kitchen table." She gathered her portfolio with the same composed efficiency and left without another word. Helena closed the front door behind her and came back to the kitchen doorway, eyebrows raised. "Should I make more coffee?" Helena asked. "Please," I said. I stood at the kitchen window, staring at the driveway until my phone buzzed. "Elliot." I stepped out through the side door onto the stone porch, pulling it shut behind me, and answered before the second ring. "I was going to call you at 7, Elliot said. "Tell me about the filing." "I've been up since 4. Gideon listened to me carefully. His voice was measured and precise, the same voice he used when delivering verdicts he knew would hurt. "What happened last night, the video the wire transferred, demand the paperwork that showed up this morning. This is not a kidnapping." I gripped the phone tighter. "Elliot, I mean that structurally. The documents Vivian Cross is carrying, and yes, I know who she is, were filed and formatted before Avery disappeared. The trust suspension language matches a draft I flagged on Thursday. Someone built the legal architecture for this transaction days in advance and then created a crisis to make you sign it." He paused. "This is not a ransom situation. This is a corporate acquisition wrapped around a child." The words landed in my chest like stones dropped into still water, heavy sinking, spreading out in every direction. "Give me 24 hours, I said. "Gideon, 24 hours, Elliot. Don't do anything yet." I ended the call and stood on the cold stone porch for a long moment, the October morning raw and gray around me. Then I turned and opened the side door. Brielle was standing just inside 3 feet from the door arms folded. Her eyes tracked from my face to the phone in my hand. "Who was that?" she asked. I looked at my daughter. The woman I had carried home from the hospital, taught to ride a bicycle in this same driveway, sat beside through 3 fever-racked nights when she was 7 years old, and I was convinced I was going to lose her. I looked at her, and I thought about the documents on my kitchen table that no one had drafted overnight. "Nobody important," I said, and I walked past her into the house, knowing that nothing between us would ever be quite the same again. By early Sunday afternoon, Vale Estate had the particular quiet of a house that has expelled every unnecessary person and is now holding its breath. The caterers were gone. The guests were gone. The string quartet, the florist, the borrowed elegance of the night before, all of it stripped away, leaving nothing but the family and the weight of what we could not say out loud. I sat in my study with the door half open, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Through the window, I could see the back garden, the lawn where Avery had dragged me the night before, still scattered with a few paper napkins the cleanup crew had missed. One of them lifted in the October breeze and skidded slowly across the grass. Brielle was in the living room, with Caleb speaking in low, controlled bursts. I had stopped trying to make out the words. Then Helena knocked. Helena Price had managed this house for 22 years. She had been here when Eleanor was alive, when Brielle was a teenager slamming doors, when I came home from the hospital after my bypass and could barely climb the stairs. She knew every room, every cabinet, every drawer in this building. More importantly, she knew when something was out of place. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, not loudly but deliberately. Then she set her phone on my desk screen, facing up, showing a paused frame from the kidnapping video. "I need to show you something," she said, "and I need you to look carefully before you say anything." I leaned forward. "What is it?" Helena pointed to the bottom left corner of the frozen image, the edge of Avery's shoulder, the fabric of what she was wearing. That nightgown, the little one with the yellow flowers along the collar. "I see it. Brielle packed that for Avery when they went to the lake house 2 weekends ago." Helena's voice was steady, but her hands were pressed flat on my desk, the way a person holds themselves together. I folded it myself. It went into the green duffel bag with Avery's other overnight things. And when they came back last Sunday, that bag came back without it. I assumed it had been left behind by accident. I straightened in my chair. "You're certain it's the same one?" "Mr. Vale, I have been doing this family's laundry for 22 years. I know every piece of clothing in this house." Her jaw tightened. "That nightgown is at the lake house. It did not come back with them, which means whoever filmed this video filmed it there." The cold started somewhere at the base of my spine and moved upward. "There's something else," Helena said. She reached across and advanced the video frame by frame until the background came into partial focus, a dark corner, and draped over a chair behind Avery the edge of a blanket, faded blue with a worn satin border along one side. "That blanket, the one in the corner." I looked at it. "Eleanor's." "Yes." Helena's voice dropped. "Mrs. Vale used it every winter for the last decade. It was kept in the cedar chest in the lake house master bedroom. I washed it by hand every season." She pressed her lips together, hard chin, lifting slightly. "Whoever set up that room knew exactly where to find it, or they were already there." I stood up. My legs felt strange, like the floor had shifted 2 inches to the left. "Helena, I need the key access log for the lake house. Electronic entry records every entry and exit for the last 30 days. I can pull that from the property management system right now." She was already moving toward the door. "Quietly," I said. "Don't mention it to Brielle." She nodded once and left. I picked up my phone and called Clara Whitaker my executive assistant, a meticulous woman in her late 30s who had worked at Vale Meridian for 6 years and possessed the rare ability to find information that other people believed was hidden. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Vale, I was going to call you this morning." "Come to the house," I said. "Now, bring your laptop and don't tell anyone where you're going." Clara arrived within 40 minutes, laptop already open before she sat down at the study table. She was a compact, focused woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the permanent slight frown of someone processing 3 things at once. "Talk to me about the emergency proxy document," I said. "The one Vivian Cross brought this morning." Clara's fingers were already moving. I had the same instinct. I pulled the file from the system copy Vivian's office transmitted last week. She sent a draft version to our legal inbox on Thursday for formatting review. "Routine except..." She turned the laptop to face me. Look at the metadata. On the screen file, properties for emergency proxy draft version 2, created Wednesday, October 9th, 2:17 p.m. 3 days before your birthday, Clara said, and her voice had gone very flat and careful. 3 days before Avery disappeared. I read the timestamp twice. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The paper napkin had caught against the hedge and stopped moving. Clara, I said, keeping my back to her, how many people at this company would know the exact clause to unlock emergency voting rights? The specific threshold language, the procedural mechanism, the board notification window. I heard her typing, pulling records, cross-referencing, doing what she did better than anyone I had ever employed. The keys slowed, then stopped. Mr. Vale, she said carefully. There are 4 people in the company's history who helped draft that clause. 2 are retired, 1 is on the current board. She paused. And 1 was terminated approximately 10 years ago. I kept looking at the garden. I already knew the name she was about to say. An hour later, I found a reason to send Brielle and Caleb to the police liaison office to file the formal missing persons report, a step they couldn't reasonably refuse without raising suspicion. The moment their car cleared the front gate, I sent a text to a number I had memorized years ago and never expected to use this way. Library, 20 minutes, no phones. Elliot Marlowe arrived in 19. The library at the far end of the east hallway was the one room in this house Brielle had avoided since childhood. Too many books, she always said, not enough air. It was perfect for exactly that reason. I closed the door, and Elliot sat down across from me with his jacket on, and his expression arranged into the particular careful focus he reserved for situations requiring absolute precision. Tell me what you need, he said. I need FBI, I said. Not through 911, not through the local field office intake line. Someone who handles corporate extortion and won't leave a paper trail that Caleb can find in our internal communications. Elliot leaned forward. Rebecca Sloan. She's a senior agent out of the New York field office anti-extortion corporate crimes division. We worked adjacent cases twice. She's good, she's quiet, and she understands that sometimes the most dangerous crimes look like paperwork. He pulled out his personal cell, not his work phone. I'll reach her directly. How long? If she's available an hour. He was already dialing. Gideon, while I do this, you need to keep performing. I looked at him. Performing. Brielle and Caleb cannot know you've moved. As far as they're concerned, you are a frightened 73-year-old man who wired $250,000 last night and is one phone call away from signing whatever they put in front of him. His eyes were direct and serious. Can you do that? I've been running board meetings for 40 years, I said. I know how to control a room. He almost smiled, then he turned away and began to speak quietly into the phone. I stepped out into the hallway and nearly walked directly into Caleb. He was carrying 2 mugs of coffee, a gesture of normalcy, so deliberate it felt like a stage prop. He held one out to me, face arranged in exhausted concern. Thought you could use this, he said. Thank you. I took it, wrapped both hands around the mug, let my shoulders drop slightly, let a tremor into my breath, just enough. Any word? Nothing yet. Caleb shook his head slowly. The detective from last night said they're following leads, whatever that means. He looked at me over the rim of his mug. Gideon about the documents Vivian brought this morning. I overreacted, I said. I was exhausted and I took it out on her. Something shifted in Caleb's eyes, a flicker of relief so quick most people would miss it. I didn't miss it. She can come back whenever you're ready. There's no pressure. We just want Avery home. Of course, I said. We all do. He nodded and moved back toward the kitchen. I watched him go and took a slow sip of coffee that tasted like nothing. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. Confirmed, monitoring active. Do not change behavior. Elliot appeared at the library door and gave me the smallest nod. Rebecca Sloan was in. That was when Nolan Pierce called. Nolan was my head of security, ex-federal, sharp and economical, with words the kind of man who noticed everything and said only what was necessary. I had assumed he was on the forced leave that had conveniently placed him off property the night of Avery's disappearance. He had other ideas. I know about the leave notice, he said without preamble. I didn't request it. I've been looking at the system logs. The email that generated my leave authorization came from an internal account, Mr. Mercer's credentials. I kept my voice level. You're certain? I pulled the server timestamp and the device ID. It came from his work laptop, sent at 11:43 a.m. on Friday. A beat. Mr. Vale, someone moved me off the board before the game started. Where are you now? Parked 2 blocks from the estate. I didn't want to come in without your word. I need you to drive to the lake house in Berkshires, I said. Don't announce it, don't log it, don't tell anyone. I need eyes on the property. What's there, what was there recently, anything that doesn't belong. Understood. Then, sir, is Avery okay? My throat tightened. Not yet, I said, but she will be. I ended the call and stood in the hallway, the house quiet around me. Caleb and Brielle moving somewhere in the back rooms. Elliot coordinating with the FBI in the library. Nolan already driving north. The pieces were moving. All I had to do was not let them see my hands. Then at 9:47 that evening, a message came through on the same blocked number that had sent the video. Short, direct, 1 call, 30 seconds, no more. Be ready at 10 p.m. I read it 3 times. My heart kicked hard against my ribs, not from fear, but from the sudden sharp awareness that this was it. This was the moment I had been building towards since the night before. 30 seconds with Avery. I didn't need 30 seconds to tell her I loved her. She already knew that. I needed 30 seconds to ask her one specific question. A question only she and I would understand, with an answer that would tell me exactly where she was. I put the phone in my shirt pocket directly over my heart and waited. 9:58 p.m. I sat in the armchair by the study window, with the phone face up on my knee, watching the seconds move. The house had settled into its nighttime quiet, the kind of quiet that feels held rather than natural, every creak of the old floorboards amplified by the absence of everything else. Brielle was in the hallway. I could hear her pacing short, controlled steps back and forth across the hardwood, the sound of a woman burning through nervous energy she could not afford to show. Caleb had planted himself at the kitchen table with a glass of water. He wasn't drinking phone, positioned in front of him at an angle that let him watch the screen without appearing to. I was watching all of it. And none of it. What I was really doing was thinking about a Tuesday afternoon in early spring 4 years ago, when Avery was 5. We had gotten turned around on a trail in the nature preserve behind this property. Nothing dangerous, just enough trees that the house wasn't visible, and Avery had grabbed my hand and announced with complete confidence that she knew exactly which way to go. How do you know? I had asked her. She had pointed without hesitation. Because the compass in my chest always points home, Grandpa. You just have to be quiet enough to feel it. I had laughed. I had told her she had a gift. And from that afternoon forward, Little Compass had been her name between us, a name that meant she was the one who always knew the way back. She still thought it was our game. That was the only reason what I was about to do had any chance of working. At 10 o'clock exactly, the phone rang. I answered before the second pulse. The distorted voice came through immediately flat and businesslike. 30 seconds, starting now. Then Avery's voice, and my heart lurched so hard, I had to press my free hand against my sternum to steady myself. Grandpa? Her voice was thin and frayed at the edges, the particular sound of a child who has been crying for a long time and has temporarily run out of tears. Grandpa, are you there? I'm here, sweetheart. I kept my voice even, warm, the voice I used when she woke up from nightmares. I'm right here. Are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere? No. A small, shaky breath. I'm not hurt, but I want to come home. I want to come home right now. I don't like it here anymore. It's cold and it smells weird, and the man won't tell me when you're coming. Her voice cracked on the last word and broke into a fresh wave of quiet, exhausted crying that nearly undid me entirely. My eyes burned. My jaw ached from holding itself in place. I know, I said. I know, baby. I'm coming for you. I promise you I am coming. I paused one beat, just one. Hey, do you remember our game? A tiny hesitation. The compass game. Tell me, where does the compass point when you dream? Another pause, longer this time. I heard her breathe. I heard something shift in the background, a chair perhaps, someone moving nearby. And then quietly, so quietly I nearly missed it under the distortion. Lake house. The line went dead. I sat holding a silent phone in a room that felt like it had contracted around me by several feet. 2 words. That was all it took. 2 words from a 9-year-old girl who thought she was playing a game with her grandfather, who had no idea she had just handed me the most important piece of information I had been trying to find for 24 hours. I wanted to fall apart. I wanted to press both hands over my face and shake with the relief and the terror of it simultaneously. Instead, I set the phone down on the armrest very carefully and breathed in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts the way the cardiologist had taught me after my bypass. Then Brielle came through the door. She had stopped pacing. Her face was chalked pale eyes, red-rimmed and glassy, and she crossed the room toward me with her arms wrapped tight around her own ribs like she was holding herself together by force. "Is she okay?" Brielle's voice came out cracked and urgent. What did she say? Did they say anything about... Did they give any timeline, any indication of when they'd... She sounded scared, I said. "That's it!" Brielle's voice pitched upward, raw and fraying. 30 seconds, and that's all you got. Did she say where she was? Did she say anything about who was with her, what the place looked like? She said she wasn't hurt. I looked at my daughter steadily. She said she was cold. Brielle pressed her fingers hard against her mouth. Her shoulders shook once a single violent tremor, and her eyes flooded over. "God," she whispered. "God, she must be so frightened." I watched my daughter's face while she cried. I watched the way the tears came, real tears. I had no doubt of that. And I watched the way her eyes, even while wet, kept moving, tracking, calculating. The crying was genuine. The grief underneath it was genuine. But threaded through every expression like a wire through fabric was something that did not belong on the face of a mother who did not know where her child was. It was the faint involuntary tension of someone waiting to find out if a plan was still on track. "Dad?" Caleb appeared in the doorway, voice tight. "Did she give any indication of location? Anything we can work with?" "Nothing useful," I said. Something moved through Caleb's face too quickly to name. His jaw shifted. He looked at Brielle, then back at me, then nodded slowly. Okay. We just have to keep doing what they're asking. Stay calm, stay cooperative. Gideon, I really think you should reconsider the documents. Not tonight, Caleb." I stood up and my legs held, which I was grateful for. "I'm going to bed. We'll talk in the morning." I walked past both of them into the hallway, up the staircase, and into my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and pressed the heels of both hands against my eyes until the burning stopped. She said, "Lake House." Nolan was already there. At 11:58, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Nolan's encrypted line. 7 words. "I'm at the lake house. You need to see what's here." I read Nolan's message 4 times, standing in my bathroom with the door locked and the tap running, in case anyone in the hallway was listening, for the sound of a phone screen activating in the dark. Then I called him back on the encrypted line. He answered on the first ring voice, low and precise. "I'm inside, back bedroom. You need to hear all of this." "Talk to me," I said. The room where the video was filmed, I found it. North-facing bedroom, 2nd floor, the one with the blue curtains. A pause as he moved. There are indentations in the floorboards from a tripod. 3-point pattern standard video equipment positioned to frame the corner of the room against the dark wall. Whoever set this up knew exactly what angle they wanted. My hand tightened on the phone. "What else?" Zip ties on the floor beside the radiator. Both cut clean, not snapped, cut with a blade. 1 pair child-sized, and next to the radiator. He stopped for a moment. When he continued, his voice had shifted slightly, some professional layer wearing thin. "There's a small white sneaker under the bed frame, left foot, size 3. It has a little star drawn on the toe in purple marker." My throat closed completely. Avery had drawn that star herself the week before school started. She had showed it to me with enormous pride at breakfast, holding her foot up and rotating it so I could see from every angle. "Nolan!" My voice came out rough-stripped. "Is she there? Is there any sign she's still in the building? I've cleared every room, every closet, every crawl space, the boathouse, the detached garage." A beat of silence that cost him something too, I could tell. "She's not here, Mr. Vale. Someone moved her. The bed in that room was slept in recently within the last 24 hours based on the sheets. She was here, but she is gone now." I sat down on the edge of the bathtub because my legs decided they were finished standing. The tiles were cold through my shirt. "There's one more thing," Nolan said, "and I need you to prepare yourself. Tell me." On the floor beside the sneaker, there's a piece of paper folded twice like a kid folds things. I opened it. Another pause, and I could hear him steadying himself. It's a drawing, crayon, a house, some trees, what I think is supposed to be a lake. And at the bottom, printed in block letters the way kids write when they're trying to be very clear. His voice dropped. Grandpa, find me. The sound that came out of me was not a word. It was something older than words, something that had been sitting in the center of my chest since Saturday night, compressing tighter with every passing hour, finally pushing its way out through my throat as nothing more than a short, broken exhale. She had written that in a cold room in a house she thought she knew waiting for me to come. Take a photograph, I managed. Document everything. Don't touch anything else. I want it all preserved for the FBI. Already done. Sending now. He paused. Mr. Vale, whoever put her in that room, there's evidence someone was staying with her. Second coffee cup in the kitchen, 2 sets of footprints on the dock, an adult with her, and whoever that person was. He chose his next words carefully. They left her shoes. They gave her paper and crayons. They didn't lock the bedroom door. I pressed my free hand flat against the cold tile wall. You're telling me someone with her had a conscience. I'm telling you she wasn't alone, and she wasn't treated cruelly, not in this house. What happened after they moved her? I can't speak to that. Get back in your car, I said. I need you on your way back toward the city. I'll send coordinates when Rebecca's team has them. Copy that. I ended the call and sat on the bathtub edge in my locked bathroom for what felt like a very long time. The tap was still running. Steam had fogged the mirror. Somewhere in a room I couldn't reach, my granddaughter had picked up a crayon and written my name with complete, unshakable faith that I was coming. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked into the bedroom. Through the wall, I could hear movement in the hallway. Caleb awake early, or perhaps never having slept. I crossed to the bedroom door and opened it a crack. Caleb was at the end of the hall, back to me, phone pressed to his ear. Even from 15 feet away, I could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his free hand kept raking through his hair. He was getting bad news from someone. I watched him absorb it, watched the stiffness spread from his shoulders down through his whole frame. Then he lowered the phone and turned slightly, and I stepped back from the door crack but kept watching through the gap. Caleb looked down at his phone screen. His face in the pale gray light of early morning had gone the color of paper. His hand was shaking, not performing, actually shaking, the fine, involuntary tremor of a man whose plan has just been ripped out from under him. He read whatever was on the screen a second time, then a third. Then he placed the phone face down on the hallway table, with a care that was almost tender, the way you set something down when you need a moment before you can deal with what it means. I had been close enough just barely to catch 3 words on his screen before the phone flipped over. The performance is over. There are moments in life when a room does not simply go quiet. It goes hollow, like something has reached in and removed all the breathable air and replaced it with something thicker, something that presses against your eardrums and makes every small sound feel enormous. The refrigerator hum, the tick of the kitchen clock, the scrape of a chair leg against tile. That was Monday morning in the kitchen of Vale Estate. I came downstairs at 7:15 to find Caleb already at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug, staring at the surface of his coffee the way a man stares at something he cannot stop seeing. He heard my footsteps and looked up, and whatever expression he was reaching for, composure, concerned the performance of a worried father, he didn't quite make it in time. I walked to the table. I set my phone down in front of him, screen facing up, the 3 words still visible in the notification preview. The performance is over. Who sent you that message, Caleb? His face went through 5 different things in about 2 seconds. Denial assembled itself, first got halfway up, then collapsed under its own weight. His mouth opened, closed. His hands tightened around the mug until his knuckles went bone white, and then all at once he seemed to deflate like something structural had finally given way inside him. "It's not what you think," he said, and his voice came out ragged and thin, nothing like the steady, controlled tone I had been listening to through walls for 2 days. "It got out of hand. Everything got completely out of hand, and I swear to God, Gideon, nobody intended for Avery to actually be in danger. That was never—" "Who sent the message?" I kept my voice level, even. The way I had kept it in boardrooms for 40 years, when I needed someone to understand that I was not asking twice. Caleb pushed back from the table and stood up too fast, chair scraping loud across the tile, one hand pressing hard against his forehead. "We thought it would take a few days. A few days, that's all. You'd sign the papers, we'd bring her home, everything would go back to what?" I said. "Back to you sitting at my table in my house, telling me what my company is worth, while you run up debts I don't know about and borrowed against positions you never had." He flinched like I had struck him. His chin trembled, actually trembled, this 45-year-old man standing in my kitchen, the architecture of every lie he had built for the last 4 years, visible now in the way he couldn't hold his own face still. "I needed more time," he said, voice cracking. "I just needed more time to fix it. The investments went sideways, the margins collapsed. If Vale Meridian had just restructured the way I suggested 2 years ago, then none of this would have been necessary. You used my granddaughter." The words came out quieter than I expected, quieter and harder. "You used a 9-year-old child to extort me." Caleb pressed both hands over his face and made a sound I had no name for. Not quite crying, not quite not crying, something broken and ugly and real. That was when Brielle came through the kitchen doorway. She had heard everything. I could see it in the way she stopped moving the moment she crossed the threshold. Feet-planted shoulders, pulled-in eyes going from Caleb's shaking frame to my face and back again. She was wearing yesterday's clothes. Her hair had not been brushed. And in her eyes, behind the fear behind the calculation I had been watching for 2 days, there was something else now. Something that looked very much like a woman who had just watched the last wall come down. "Dad!" Her voice broke on the single syllable. She took a step toward me, hand reaching out. "Dad, please listen to me." "I'm listening," I said. "I've been listening for 2 days." She pressed her fingers hard against her mouth. Her whole body shook with the effort of holding herself upright, and then she stopped holding herself and simply broke. Tears came down her face in a rush, shoulders heaving, one hand gripping the kitchen counter like it was the only solid thing in the world. "We only wanted you to sign," she managed between sobs. "Just the papers, just to keep what's ours. I know how that sounds, I know. But we were losing everything. Caleb's accounts were frozen. The creditors were. I was terrified, Dad. I was so terrified. And I thought, if you just signed, we could fix it. We could fix all of it, and nobody would ever have to know. Do you remember Sunday morning?" I asked. "When you asked me who I'd been on the phone with." She looked at me. Something moved in her eyes. "I told you nobody important," I said. That was the moment I decided I was going to end this my way. Not Caleb's way, not Rowan's way, mine. I looked at her steadily. "You raised your daughter to believe she was helping save her family. She performed that role for weeks without a single complaint. She was better at loyalty than any of us deserved." Brielle pressed both hands over her face. Her shoulders shook. Not performing this time. Just breaking. "Where is she, Brielle?" My voice was very quiet. "Where is Avery right now?" The sobbing stopped, or rather, it stuttered. Something shifted behind her eyes, something cold cutting through the grief, and her voice when it came out was different, smaller. "I don't know," she whispered. "That's the truth. I genuinely don't know. It was supposed to be the lake house. Just for a few days we had someone watching her. She wasn't supposed to leave that house until you signed." She's not at the lake house," I said. Brielle's legs gave. She caught herself on the counter, Knuckles' white face gone completely colorless. "What do you mean she's not?" "She's gone, Brielle. Someone moved her. Someone you and Caleb brought into this house and gave access to your daughter and apparently had no ability to control once the money was on the table." Caleb made another sound from behind his hands. Brielle stared at me with eyes that had gone wide and glassy and full of a terror that was finally entirely genuine. The performance was over for her, too. I thought about what I imagined might have happened, what I needed to believe might have happened in the days before this. I thought about Brielle alone in a room somewhere, looking at a photograph of Avery as a baby, hands trembling, telling herself it was temporary. Just a few days. She'll be fine. I wanted to believe she had said that to herself. I wanted to believe there had been a moment of human doubt, of maternal instinct fighting through the greed and the desperation, that she had looked at her daughter's face in a photograph and felt something real. Maybe she had. I would never know for certain. What I knew was what was in front of me now. My daughter crumpled against a kitchen counter, my son-in-law with his face in his hands, and a 9-year-old girl, somewhere I couldn't reach yet, waiting. My phone rang. "Unknown number?" I answered it. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and carried the particular polished smoothness of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the stakes were always someone else's suffering. "Mr. Vale," he said, "my name is Rowan Blackwell. I think it's time we spoke directly." I stepped out through the side door onto the stone porch before Rowan Blackwell had finished his opening sentence. The October morning hit me like a cold hand-gray sky leaves down the smell of rain somewhere in the distance. I pulled the door shut behind me and kept my voice completely neutral. "Mr. Blackwell," I said, "I've been wondering when you'd call." A brief pause just long enough to tell me he hadn't expected that. "Then you're better informed than your son-in-law would have liked." "Caleb has never been particularly good at covering his tracks," I said. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted." His voice settled back into its polished groove, unhurried and precise. "Vale Meridian Group, the full acquisition. A merger approval signed, notarized, witnessed on camera, which, as you understand, means it becomes essentially ironclad under Delaware corporate law. No board petition, no shareholder challenge, no morning after regret that a judge will take seriously. I want to explain what a notarized camera-witnessed merger approval means in plain terms, because Rowan was counting on me to understand the weight of it. In the United States, when a document is signed before a notary public and recorded on video, it creates a legal record of the signer's identity, presence, and apparent willingness. It does not prevent a legal challenge, but it raises the bar for one considerably. Rowan wanted that bar as high as possible. He wanted my signature to look to any court that examined it like the free and voluntary act of a man in full possession of his faculties. He wanted me to hand him my life's work and smile while I did it. "And in exchange," I said, "the girl comes home the moment the ink dries, safe, unharmed, delivered to whatever address you specify within 2 hours of confirmation." I leaned against the stone railing and looked out at the back lawn, the same lawn where Avery had pulled me 2 nights ago. The paper napkin still caught against the hedge, turning dark with morning damp. "And if I don't?" I said. 3 seconds of silence. Exactly 3. Counted and deliberate. "I've never needed to answer that question twice," Rowan said. The call ended. I stood on the porch for a long moment, letting the cold settle into my jacket. A lesser man, or a more frightened one, might have felt the walls closing in. Instead, I felt something click into place in my chest, the way a key turns in a lock that has been stiff for too long. Everything that had been scattered and confusing for the last 48 hours was suddenly crystallinely clear. Rowan Blackwell was a serious man. His company, Blackwell Capital Group, had spent 3 years circling Vale Meridian the way a careful predator circles something it intends to take. I knew his reputation. Aggressive, methodical, legally sophisticated. He did not make moves without architecture, and that was exactly the problem. Because the architecture of what had happened, the legal documents prepared in advance, the specific exploitation of the emergency voting clause, the careful sequencing of financial pressure and emotional leverage that was not Rowan Blackwell's style. Rowan was a builder. He acquired things by constructing irresistible offers, by engineering circumstances, by removing alternatives one by one, until signing felt like the only logical choice. The use of a child was not a business tactic, it was a personal one. It required someone who understood that I could not be moved by money or by the threat of professional ruin, or by anything that attacked the company or my reputation or my physical safety. It required someone who had sat across a conference table from me for 15 years and learned slowly and carefully the one thing in the world that would make Gideon Vale abandon every principle he had ever held. Someone who knew me. I went back inside, walked straight past Brielle and Caleb without looking at either of them, and called Clara from the hallway. She answered immediately. "Mr. Vale, I need you to pull a full profile," I said, keeping my voice low. "Adrian Crow, former Chief Risk Officer, Vale Meridian, terminated approximately 10 years ago. Every company he's touched since, every board seat, every advisory role, every LLC, every holding company, every name he's appeared next to in a filing anywhere in the country. I need it within the hour." Clara's keyboard was already moving. "Is this related to—" "Everything I said. It's related to everything. Call me the moment you have it." I put the phone in my jacket pocket and stood in the hallway. The house quiet behind me, except for the sound of Brielle crying softly in the kitchen and Caleb's low, broken voice trying to say something that no longer had any meaning. Adrian Crow. I had hired him 22 years ago out of a white shoe firm in Boston, drawn by the precision of his thinking and the quietness of his ambition. For 15 years, he had been the second voice in every critical decision Vale Meridian had ever made. He knew our legal structure the way a surgeon knows anatomy. He knew our vulnerabilities, our trust instruments, our board relationships, our shareholder agreements. He knew me. I had terminated him 10 years ago over a risk assessment. He had falsified numbers, adjusted to make a bad acquisition, look viable in a deal where I later learned he had a personal financial interest. I had done it quietly with a severance package and a sealed agreement. No public scandal, no legal action. I had been merciful. I was beginning to understand what that mercy had cost me. 53 minutes later, Clara called back. Her voice was careful in a way that meant the news was significant. "I have the file," she said. "Mr. Vale, the first holding company on the list, the primary vehicle through which Adrian Crowe has been operating for the last 4 years." "What is it?" A brief pause. "It's a subsidiary of Blackwell Capital Group." I sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, not because my legs gave out, but because sometimes the mind needs the body to be still before it can process what it has just learned. Adrian had not gone to work for my enemy. Adrian had built my enemy. By Monday afternoon, the kitchen had been abandoned to the sound of Brielle crying in the guest suite, and Caleb doing whatever Caleb did when there was nothing left to manage, pacing most likely, drinking water he didn't need, rehearsing explanations nobody was going to accept. I had retreated to my study with Clara's file and a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I remembered it existed. The folder on Adrian Crowe was 43 pages. I spread it across the desk the way you lay out a map when you're trying to understand how far you are from where you meant to be. The years after his termination had not been idle ones. 4 shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada within 18 months of leaving Vale Meridian. A consulting practice with no public clients. A seat on the advisory board of a mid-size acquisition firm in Charlotte that had since been absorbed into something larger. And at the center of it, all threaded through every entity like a spine, a holding company called Crestline Partners, established 8 years ago, capitalized quietly and efficiently by a series of transfers that would take a forensic accountant 3 weeks to fully untangle. Crestline Partners was a 51% stakeholder in the early-stage investment vehicle that had seeded Blackwell Capital Group. I sat with that for a long time. Clara appeared in the doorway, laptop under her arm, reading glasses pushed up. She had clearly not stopped working since I called her that morning. "I went further," she said, setting her laptop on the corner of my desk without being asked. "Vivian Cross. You asked me to pull her background when she showed up Sunday morning. I finished it an hour ago. Tell me." She passed the bar in New York, spent 4 years at a firm called Meridian Legal Strategies. Different name from your company, different spelling, but Clara turned the laptop to face me. The founding partner of Meridian Legal Strategies is listed as one Gerald Ashworth. Gerald Ashworth is the brother-in-law of Adrian Crowe, I said. Clara nodded, jaw tight. Vivian Cross worked directly under that firm for 3 years before going independent. She drafted trust instruments, corporate proxies, emergency voting amendments. She tapped the screen. The same language that appears in your emergency proxy document appears in 2 other instruments she filed during that period. She did not write those documents on Saturday night. She has been writing versions of them for years. I leaned back in my chair and pressed both hands flat on the desk and looked at the ceiling for a moment because I needed somewhere to put the full scope of what I was understanding. Adrian had not simply planned a hostile acquisition. He had spent a decade constructing the conditions for one. Every entity, every lawyer, every legal instrument had been built and positioned like pieces on a board, waiting for the moment when the right pressure could be applied to the right person. That person was me. That pressure was Avery. "Clara!" I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Is there anyone in this picture, anyone in Adrian's network and Rowan's organization, anyone adjacent to this whole structure who might have a reason to want it to fail?" She frowned, thinking carefully. "That's an interesting question." She scrolled through the file. Rowan Blackwell has a son, Wyatt 28, listed as a junior associate at Blackwell Capital. There's very little on him publicly. He keeps a low profile. She paused. I found one thing. A charitable donation 2 years ago made in the name of a foundation called the Lily Blackwell Memorial Fund. Lily Blackwell, Rowan's daughter. She passed away 6 years ago at age 8. The air in the room shifted. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Nolan's encrypted line. I opened it. A set of GPS coordinates, and beneath them 4 words. She is here. Hurry. The coordinates resolved to the Port Chester waterfront in New York, a working Port District commercial warehouse's minimal residential presence, roughly 40 miles from where I was sitting. I called Nolan immediately. He answered in 2 rings. "Did you send this?" I said. "No." His voice was alert-focused. "That came through my old personal email, an address I stopped using 3 years ago. Whoever sent it knew where to find a line that wouldn't be monitored by anyone inside Rowan's operation." A beat. "It's not a trap, Mr. Vale. The metadata on the file is clean. It was sent from a public Wi-Fi network in Stamford, Connecticut 40 minutes ago. And whoever sent it used a throwaway email account. Created this morning, they knew exactly which channels inside Rowan's operation were being monitored, and they went around all of them." Stamford. I thought of Wyatt Blackwell, 28 years old, keeping a low profile. Someone in Rowan's organization who doesn't want this to go any further. "That's my read too," Nolan said. "What do you want me to do?" "Forward those coordinates to Rebecca Sloan. Tell her we have a potential location and we need verification before anyone moves." I paused. "And Nolan, whoever sent this. Don't burn them, not yet." "Understood." I ended the call and sat a moment longer with Clara's file in front of me. A 9-year-old girl named Lily Blackwell, who had died 6 years ago at the age of 8, and her brother, who had just sent me the coordinates of a warehouse in Port Chester. I did not understand it then. I would not fully understand it until much later, when someone who knew Wyatt Blackwell told me about the year after Lily died, the way he had sat at his father's boardroom table at age 22, and watched Rowan Blackwell absorb himself in acquisition strategies and expansion models and quarterly projections, building an empire over the grave of a little girl's memory, rather than sitting with the grief of losing her. Some things, regardless of who you are or what your name is worth, you simply cannot do. You cannot look at a 9-year-old being used as a bargaining chip and see a transaction. Some people still have that line, even in families where that line has been erased everywhere else. At 5 o'clock precisely, my phone rang. I recognized the number Denise Holloway, Vale Meridian's Director of Public Relations, a sharp and unflappable woman who had managed the company's external communications for 11 years and had never once called me on a personal line without a reason that warranted it. "Denise," I said. "Mr. Vale." Her voice was low and careful, the voice of someone speaking in a building where she was not certain who could hear. "I'm sorry to call this way. I need you to know something, and I need you to know it came directly to my desk." "Go ahead." "An hour ago, I received a press release draft from Brielle's office. Formatted, finalized, ready for distribution." She paused. "The headline reads, 'Gideon Vale steps down Vale, Meridian announces new leadership transition effective immediately. It's timed for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., embargo lift at market open.'" My hand tightened on the phone until I felt the case flex. "She wrote it before Avery came home," Denise said, and her voice dropped even lower, weighted with something that sounded almost like grief. "I don't know what's happening in your family right now, sir, but I thought you needed to know." "You were right to call," I said. "Don't distribute anything. Don't respond to her office. And Denise, don't mention this call to anyone." "Yes, sir." I put the phone down on the desk. Outside the study window, the afternoon light had gone the pale gray gold of a New England autumn evening. Somewhere out there in a warehouse by a port I had never visited, my granddaughter was waiting, and in the guest suite down the hall, my daughter had already written the announcement of my removal. I told Helena I was going out for an hour. I did not tell her where. The truth was that I did not entirely know when I got in the car where I was driving to. I just needed the particular quiet of moving the sense that I was heading towards something rather than sitting inside a house that had become unbreathable. My hands found the route without being directed the way your body sometimes remembers a road your mind has stopped consciously using. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the small gravel lot outside St. Brendan's, a modest white-steepled church in a residential neighborhood in Cos Cob that Eleanor had loved for its lack of pretension. She said it was the only place in Greenwich County that didn't try to impress anyone, including God. We had come here every Sunday morning for 11 years, until she no longer could. The lights were being switched off one by one inside. I knocked on the side door. Father Brennan Cole opened it himself, a trim white-haired man in his late 60s with reading glasses pushed down his nose and a cardigan that had seen considerably better decades. He had been the pastor here for 20 years, and he had presided over Eleanor's funeral service, and he had never once in all those years said anything to me that was not precisely what he meant. He took one look at my face and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. "I'll put the kettle on." "I don't need tea, Father. I need—" My voice caught unexpectedly. I cleared it. "I need to ask you about Avery." Father Brennan went very still. He took his reading glasses off and folded them carefully into his cardigan pocket. Then he said quietly, "How long has she been missing?" "Since Saturday night." He exhaled a long, slow breath through his nose and turned back into the church. "Come with me." He led me to the small office behind the vestry shelves of worn Bibles, a desk covered in parish bulletins, a landline phone that looked like it had been purchased in 1994. He opened the top desk drawer and removed an older model cell phone, the kind with a cracked screen protector and a rubber bumper case. "I keep a spare," he said. "The voicemails on this one I haven't deleted." He unlocked it with deliberate care, navigated to the saved messages, and held it out to me. "She called about 4 weeks ago, on a Thursday evening. I almost called you afterward. I told myself I was overreacting. I have regretted that every day since Saturday." I took the phone. I pressed play. Avery's voice came through the small speaker, clear and young and utterly earnest, the way she sounded when she was working through something that genuinely puzzled her. "Father Brennan, it's Avery. I have a question. Mommy says that sometimes we have to pretend things so that people we love will understand what matters. She called it a surprise game. And I've been doing the game for a few weeks now, and I think it's almost over. But I wanted to ask you something." A small pause, the sound of her breathing. "If I pretend long enough, will Grandpa forgive Mommy?" The recording ended. I stood holding that phone in a church office at 8 o'clock on a Monday night, and something inside my chest that had been under enormous pressure for 4 days cracked open all at once. My eyes burned. My throat closed down to almost nothing. I gripped the edge of Father Brennan's desk with my free hand because the room had tilted slightly and I needed something solid. "She didn't know," I managed. "She thought she was helping her mother." "That was my understanding too," Father Brennan said. His own voice had gone rough at the edges. He pressed his lips together and shook his head slowly. "She is a remarkable child, Gideon. Remarkable. She carried that question all by herself for weeks rather than upset anyone." He reached across and gently took the phone from my hand. "I should have called you. I'm deeply sorry that I didn't." "You couldn't have known," I said. But my voice was doing things I couldn't fully control anymore, and I had to turn toward the window for a moment and breathe. A 9-year-old girl had been handed a script and told it was a love story. She had performed it faithfully without complaint because she believed she was saving her family. She had left a voicemail for a priest asking if her sacrifice would be enough. I stayed with Father Brennan for 10 more minutes. I thanked him. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine and called a number I had pulled from Vale Meridian's old HR records that afternoon. Iris Bellamy answered on the third ring, a warm voice slightly cautious. The voice of someone who had been let go without a satisfactory explanation and was still carrying the confusion of it. "Ms. Bellamy," I said. "My name is Gideon Vale, Avery's grandfather." A sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Vale, is she all right? I saw the news alerts and I didn't know if I should." "She will be," I said, with more certainty than I felt. "I'm calling because I need to understand why you were let go 3 weeks ago, in your own words." The pause that followed was brief, but full. "Mrs. Mercer told me it was a staffing restructure," Iris said carefully. "But that wasn't it. 2 days before, she gave me notice Avery said something to me while I was helping her with homework. She was talking about a game her mother had taught her. She called it the secret game. She said she was helping fix something important. She seemed—" Another pause and Iris's voice shifted softer. "She seemed proud, like she was doing something really brave." I pressed my free hand flat against the steering wheel. "I asked her a few gentle questions," Iris continued. "I was trying to understand if something was wrong. Avery got quiet and said she probably shouldn't have said anything because it was a surprise. 2 days later, Mrs. Mercer called and said my services were no longer needed." Her voice tightened. "Mr. Vale, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to make assumptions about a family I worked for. You did nothing wrong," I said. "None of this is on you." I ended the call and sat in the dark parking lot outside St. Brendan's for a long time. The church lights had gone off behind me. The street was empty and quiet and cold. Brielle had constructed this with layers. She had coached Avery fired the woman who heard too much and drafted a press release to announce my removal before her own daughter was safely home. The cruelty of it was not the greed. I had known greed my entire professional life. The cruelty was the specific deliberate use of a child who loved her mother completely and had asked a priest whether her performance would be enough to earn forgiveness. My phone buzzed against the center console. A text from Elliot. FBI briefing at 11. Rebecca Sloan wants to move tomorrow night. I read it twice. Then I started the car. I pulled into the Vale Estate driveway at 10:51 p.m. The house was dark except for the porch light and the faint yellow glow of the lamp Helena always left on in the front entry hall, her way of telling whoever came home last that someone had remembered to wait up, even if not in person. I sat in the car for a moment before going inside, hands still on the wheel, the engine ticking as it cooled. The kitchen was empty, no sound from the guest suite. Even the house itself seemed to be holding its breath. On my desk in the study, Helena had left a cup of tea chamomile in the blue and white cup Eleanor had always preferred, set on the small wooden coaster she kept specifically for that purpose. 22 years of that woman, anticipating what a room needed before anyone asked. I sat down in the desk chair, wrapped both hands around the warm cup, and looked at the left-hand drawer. I had not opened it in 3 years, not because I had forgotten what was inside, because I remembered too well. I set the tea down. I opened the drawer. Eleanor's letter was where it had always been tucked inside a plain white envelope, my name written on the front. In her handwriting, the blue ink slightly faded at the edges from 3 years of sitting in the dark. She had left it with Elliot a week before she died, with instructions to give it to me after the funeral. I had put it in this drawer the same night and told myself I would read it when I was ready. I was not ready. I had never been ready. I opened it now. The paper unfolded with the particular softness of something that had been handled carefully and then set aside, and Eleanor's handwriting filled both sides in the close, deliberate way she wrote when she was being precise about something that mattered. She wrote about the house first, small things, practical things, the way she always warmed up to difficult subjects by circling them. Then she wrote about me, and I had to stop for a moment because even after 3 years, her voice came through the ink so clearly it felt like she was sitting across the desk. Then she wrote about Brielle. I have loved that girl every day of her life, and I will go to my grave loving her. But I have also watched her since she was 12 years old, and I have seen something in her eyes that frightens me. Not cruelty, I want to be clear about that. Not cruelty. Ambition uncoupled from conscience. The belief that wanting something badly enough makes the wanting righteous. My eyes burned. I pressed on. I have prayed for 20 years that I was wrong, that what I saw was just the sharpness of a young woman finding her way in a world that doesn't reward women for being gentle. Maybe that's all it was. I hope that's all it was. But if the day ever comes, and I pray it never does, when someone uses a child to break you, when the thing you love most becomes the lever someone uses against everything you've built, save the child first, Gideon. Save the child first. The legacy will take care of itself. I folded the letter along its original creases and held it in both hands for a long moment. My eyes were wet. I didn't bother pretending otherwise. The room was empty, and Eleanor had always said crying was not weakness. It was the body's honest response to things too large to hold quietly. She had known. Not the specifics, she couldn't have known the specifics, but she had seen the shape of something in her daughter's character, and she had written it down and sealed it in an envelope because she needed someone to know that she had not been blind. At 11 o'clock exactly, my phone rang. Secure line. I answered it. Rebecca Sloan's voice was crisp and unhurried, the voice of someone who had been awake for a long time and had learned to function through it. She spoke from what sounded like a car background traffic faint behind her. Mr. Vale, I have 6 agents positioned within half a mile of the Port Chester coordinates. We've had eyes on the warehouse since 9 p.m. A brief pause. There is a male subject inside mid-30s moving periodically, no aggressive behavior observed. A second subject is in a vehicle outside, engine off, has not entered the building. Avery, I said. Is there any indication? Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures inside the warehouse. One adult, one smaller. The smaller signature is stationary, but active. Her voice did not soften exactly, but something in it shifted fractionally. She's there, Mr. Vale. She's upright and she's moving. I pressed my free hand flat on the desk and exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. We move at 5 a.m., Rebecca continued. Pre-dawn minimal civilian presence in the port district at that hour. But I need something before we can execute. The probable cause we have is solid, but a federal judge will want a device connection, something that places one of the subjects in direct contact with a criminal conspiracy. A file they open to communication, they received anything that links their device to the extortion. She paused. Do you have something like that? Elliot, sitting in the chair across from my desk, where he had been for the last 40 minutes, reached into the brown leather case beside his chair and set a manila folder on the desk in front of me. He tapped it once. Tell her yes, he said quietly. We have something, I told Rebecca. A document package. It looks like the merger approval they've been demanding, same formatting, same language, same legal structure. But it contains an embedded tracking element and a series of identifying markers that will register device information the moment someone opens the attached file. Rebecca processed this. How was this prepared? My attorney built the shell. The tracking component was provided by your office's digital forensics contact, which Elliot reached out to this afternoon. I looked at Elliot, who gave a single nod, confirming the authorization was clean. Everything is within the warrant parameters you filed this evening. Good, Rebecca said. We need that document in their hands before 4 a.m. Can you make that happen? Yes, I said. I can make that happen. After the call ended, Elliot and I sat across from each other in the quiet study. Helena's chamomile had gone cold. The letter was still folded in my hand. How do you feel? Elliot asked. He was not a man who asked that question often, which meant he was asking it seriously. Like I've been running uphill for 4 days, I said, and I can finally see the top. He nodded once. Then he picked up his case and stood. I'll be back at 3:30. Get some sleep if you can. I doubted that was possible, but I picked up the pen on my desk and signed the cover page of the false document package, the signature that would make it look authentic enough to open. Then I typed a message to Nolan on the encrypted line. Deliver the package to Cole Varick's vehicle. Leave it on the passenger seat. Window was left unlocked per our source. Tonight, we end this. I set the phone down and looked at Eleanor's letter one more time. Then I folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in my jacket pocket instead of the drawer. This time, I was keeping it close. Before I show you the moment Gideon walked into that room and looked his enemies in the eye, drop the word compass in the comments to let me know you're still here. This next part, I don't think you'll see it coming. Quick note portions of this story include fictional details woven in for clarity and impact. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but what this moment teaches about trust and betrayal, that's something worth sitting with. The car service dropped Elliot and me outside a building on 54th Street in Midtown at 8:15 Tuesday morning. Glass and steel 40 stories, the kind of building that housed 12 different law firms, and a rotating cast of neutral conference spaces that corporate attorneys rented by the hour precisely because they belonged to no one. Rowan Blackwell had chosen well. I had to give him that. I had worn the gray suit, the one Eleanor had always said, made me look like someone who had already won the argument before sitting down. I had left my watch at home deliberately. In a room designed to make me feel like I was surrendering, I intended to give them nothing to read. Elliot carried the brown leather case. Inside it, the false document package tracker, active legal trap, embedded every page formatted to look exactly like the merger approval Vivian Cross had been trying to get me to sign since Sunday morning. We took the elevator to the 31st floor. A receptionist led us down a carpeted hallway to a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Midtown. The Hudson was a gray ribbon in the distance. Rowan Blackwell was already seated at the head of the table. I had seen photographs of him press photos investor conference panels, the standard corporate portraiture of a man who understood image management. In person, he was leaner than the photographs suggested, somewhere in his early 50s, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades learning to show less than he felt. He stood when we entered, which was either courtesy or theater. With a man like Rowan, the distinction was academic. Mr. Vale, he said, thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice, I said pleasantly, and sat down across from him without shaking his hand. And that was when I saw the figure standing near the window. He had his back to the room, looking out at the skyline, hands clasped behind him. He turned at the sound of my voice, and I felt something cold and electric move through my chest, the specific sensation of seeing a face you had filed away as the past, suddenly standing in front of you in the present. Adrian Crowe was older. Of course he was 10 years had passed. The hair that had been dark brown was almost entirely silver, now cut shorter than he used to wear it. There were lines in his face that hadn't been there when he sat to my right at the Vale Meridian board table. But the eyes were identical. Precisely the same cool measuring quality I had watched operate in 100 negotiations, the eyes of a man who was always calculating 3 moves ahead and had the patience to wait for all of them. He looked at me, and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. "You look good for a man who's losing everything, Gideon," he said. My jaw tightened, my hands under the table pressed flat against my thighs. 10 years of absence, and he walked back in with a line, like that casual, almost affectionate, as if we were resuming a conversation that had been briefly interrupted, rather than a relationship I had ended by handing him a severance package and a signed non-disclosure agreement in a room with no windows. "Adrian," I kept my voice even, "I wondered when you'd stop hiding behind Rowan's letterhead." He walked to the table and pulled out the chair beside Rowan, not asking permission, not hesitating. The ease of a man who believed this room already belonged to him. "I was never hiding. You just weren't ready to look." "I underestimated you," I said. "I won't make that mistake again." Something moved behind his eyes, a flash of something that was almost pleasure. He had always thrived on being taken seriously. "You were always better at building than at protecting what you built. That was your limitation, not mine." Rowan cleared his throat with the controlled impatience of a man who had agreed to share the stage and was regretting it. "Gentlemen, we're here for a document, not a reunion." I looked at Rowan. "You want the merger approval." "I want the company," Rowan said simply. "The merger approval is the mechanism. Sign it, have it notarized." He gestured toward the corner of the room where a notary public sat with a stamp and a professional expression of studied neutrality and a camera on a small tripod that had clearly been positioned to capture the signing table. "And your granddaughter is in a car on her way home within the hour." "That's a clean offer," I said. "It's the only offer," Rowan said. I looked at Adrian. "You taught me how to read a room," I said. "You spent 15 years teaching me. You also taught me never to sign anything in a room I didn't control." Adrian leaned back in his chair, arms crossing over his chest-chin, lifting slightly. "And yet, here you are. You built an empire," he continued, and his voice dropped into something almost quiet, almost reasonable, the voice he had always used when he wanted you to believe he was being sincere rather than strategic. 40 years of work, Gideon, and you decided to give it to a charity fund named after a woman who's been dead for 3 years. I redirected it to someone who would actually use it, someone who would grow it. You should be thanking me." The rage that moved through me was cold rather than hot, the kind that does not raise the voice or flush the face, the kind that settles into the hands and the jaw and waits. "You used a 9-year-old girl," I said. "My granddaughter. You suggested it, didn't you? Rowan would never have thought of that on his own. That was you." A muscle moved in Adrian's jaw, just once. "Business requires leverage," he said. "She's 9 years old," I said. "She left a note in a room asking her grandfather to find her." My voice stayed controlled by an effort I could feel in my throat and my sternum simultaneously. "There is no leverage calculation that justifies that. None." Elliot set the document package on the table in front of me. I picked it up, looked at it, then pushed it across the table toward Rowan. "Fine," I said. "Here's your signature." Rowan reached for it immediately. Vivian Cross, seated to his left, pulled it to her side. First opened her laptop and began flipping through the pages with the rapid professional focus of someone who had drafted most of the original language and knew exactly what she was looking for. She found the attached digital file on the last page formatted as a verification document labeled as a supporting exhibit. She clicked it. Across the table, I lifted my glass of water and took a slow, careful sip. The tracker was running. Somewhere in the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan, a device was registering an IP address, a machine ID, and a timestamp that would appear before a federal judge within the hour. Adrian was watching my face. He was very good at reading faces. He had always been very good at reading faces. "You're not nervous," he said. His voice had changed. Lower. Careful. "No," I said. "I'm not." There are stretches of night that time seems to abandon entirely. Not the comfortable dark of sleep, not the productive dark of work, but the hollow, suspended dark of waiting for something you cannot control. in a car that smells like cold coffee and old leather, watching a warehouse door that has not moved in 40 minutes. Every minute between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. on the morning of Wednesday, October 16th, felt like it had been stretched on a rack until it was thin enough to see through. I had been in the passenger seat of Nolan's car since 1:30, parked 2 blocks from the Port Chester waterfront, on a service road that ran behind a row of commercial storage units. Elliot was in the back seat. None of us had spoken in 20 minutes. The radio on my knee was set to Rebecca's channel, the volume low enough that only the 3 of us could hear it. At 2:47, Rebecca's voice came through. "Vale, you copy." I pressed the transmit button. "Copy, go ahead." Tracker confirmed. The document was opened on a device registered to a prepaid account, but the machine ID matches a laptop we've been flagging in connection with Rowan Blackwell's operation for the past 8 months. That's our device link. A brief pause. Federal judge signed the warrant 11 minutes ago. We're green. Elliot exhaled in the back seat, a long, slow breath that he had clearly been holding since yesterday morning. "What's the status inside?" I asked. One heat signature stationary in the northeast corner of the main floor. Small, child-sized. Rebecca's voice was precise and unhurried, but I had been listening to her for 3 days now, and I could hear the careful control underneath it. One adult moving periodically nearby. Second adult outside at the south vehicle entrance, been stationary for the last 40 minutes. That's Mason. Mason? I had learned the name from Cole Varick's file that Rebecca's team had compiled. A mid-level operative in Rowan's organization, no prior kidnapping charges, primarily used for logistics and transport. The kind of man who did not think of himself as dangerous because he had never been asked to do anything that felt dramatic enough to be dangerous, until now. "There's a complication," Rebecca said. "We intercepted a communication to Mason's phone at 0200. Text message encrypted, but we broke it. Mason has orders to transfer the child to a secondary location at 0600. Hand off to a third party." My hand tightened on the radio. "Who?" "Someone we don't have a leniency file on," she said. "Someone who hasn't been sitting in a warehouse for 4 days having second thoughts." A pause. "We move at 0500. That gives us an hour buffer before Mason's transfer window." "I want to be at the entry point," I said. "Absolutely not." "Rebecca, Mr. Vale." Her voice sharpened. "I have 6 agents and a tactical coordinator. I do not have room for a 73-year-old civilian at a federal extraction. She knows my voice." I said it flat and clear, cutting through her objection. If she wakes up in the middle of that room, with people she doesn't know coming through the door, she will panic, she will fight, she will make noise. And noise at 0500 in a port warehouse is a variable none of us want. I kept my voice steady. If she hears me just my voice, I don't need to be inside. She will calm down. You need that. Silence on the radio for a long moment. Then Rebecca said, "You stay at the vehicle perimeter. You do not cross the threshold under any circumstances. If I tell you to get back in the car, you get back in the car." "Agreed," I said. Elliot leaned forward from the back seat, hand on my shoulder. "Gideon." His voice was low and rough in a way I had not heard from him before. "Bring her home." At 3:15, one of Rebecca's surveillance agents positioned at a narrow window on the west side of the warehouse reported what he could see inside. I listened through the radio and built the image in my mind piece by piece, the way you reconstruct a room from a description when you cannot be there yourself. Avery was asleep on a folded tarp in the northeast corner. She had a jacket over her adult-sized dark draped across her shoulders and chest like a blanket. Her hair was loose and tangled. Her knees were pulled up toward her chest the way she always slept when she was cold, the way I had seen her sleep in the back of cars on long drives when she was younger. Cole Varick was sitting on a crate 4 feet away, not watching the door, watching her. The agent described him as motionless, elbows on his knees, head slightly bowed. The surveillance agent said he had been in that position for over an hour. I thought about that for a long time. A man who had agreed to be part of a kidnapping, sitting in the dark, watching a 9-year-old sleep, not because he was guarding her, but because he could not quite bring himself to look away. I did not forgive him, but I understood something about him in that moment that I would remember later when it mattered. At 4:45, the team moved into position. I got out of Nolan's car and walked to the edge of the perimeter barrier, a chain-link fence at the corner of the service road, about 60 feet from the warehouse's east entrance. An agent in a dark jacket held up a hand when I reached the fence. This is as far as you go, sir. I know, I said. I stood at that fence with the radio in my right hand and the October pre-dawn cold working its way through my jacket, and I waited. The port was quiet, a distant foghorn somewhere on the water, the low creak of rigging, the smell of diesel and salt. Overhead, the sky was the deep blue black of an hour before first light. At 5:17, a voice on the radio said, "In position, stand by." At 5:19, a second voice, "South entrance clear. Mason is moving toward the vehicle." At 5:20, I heard Mason shout from somewhere inside the building, not a word, just a sound. The guttural burst of a man who has turned a corner and found something he did not expect. Then rapid footsteps. Then a crash of something metal. Then Rebecca's voice controlled and absolute, "Go, go, go." The next 4 minutes and 31 seconds were the longest of my life. I know the exact duration because I was gripping the chain link fence with one hand and watching the second hand on the wall clock of the service building across the road because I needed something to hold on to. Other than the sound coming through my radio and the images my mind kept constructing and dismantling every few seconds. Mason shouting, then agents' voices cutting over each other, clipped and precise, the controlled language of trained people executing a plan. A door banging hard against a frame, running steps on concrete. Then Rebecca, subject 1 down, subject 2, compliant. Then quiet. 8 seconds of quiet that felt like falling. Then a voice I had never heard before, one of the entry agents saying into his radio carefully, "We have the child, she's awake. She's very frightened." And then I heard Avery. Not words, just a sound, a high, raw, broken sound that children make when they have been holding themselves together for too long and something finally gives way. A sound I had not heard from her since she was 4 years old and fell off her bicycle in the driveway and lay on the pavement for a stunned second before the reality of it hit her all at once. My legs started moving before I made a decision to move them. The agent at the perimeter fence stepped in front of me, young, solidly built, hand up. "Sir, I cannot let you. She needs to hear my voice," I said. My own voice came out rougher than I intended. "Please, just let me talk to her." He looked at me. Really looked the way people do when they're deciding whether a situation has changed enough to change the rules. And then he reached for his radio. "Agent Sloan, the grandfather is requesting a radio contact with the child." A beat. Then Rebecca's voice, slightly breathless. "Put him on." The agent handed me his radio. I pressed the transmit button with a hand that was finally shaking. "Little compass," I said. "Grandpa's here." 1 second, 2. The radio carried the ambient sound of the warehouse voices movement, the creak of the building. Then, Grandpa, her voice, small and cracked and completely unmistakably hers. "Right here, sweetheart." My throat was closing down, and I was letting it because there was no one watching and no reason to hold anything back anymore. "I'm right outside. I'm coming to you right now." "You came." Her voice broke on the second word, cycling back up into that high fractured register. "Grandpa, you came. I wrote you a note. I didn't know if you'd find it." "I found it," I said, and my voice broke too. "Completely, right down the middle. I found it, baby. I'm coming." Rebecca's voice, "Bring him in." The agent opened the perimeter gate. I walked across 60 feet of gravel and concrete in the gray pre-dawn light and through the east entrance of a warehouse that smelled of salt water and rust, and a small figure in an oversized dark jacket came running across the floor toward me, with everything her 9-year-old legs had. Avery hit me somewhere around the midsection, both arms going around my waist, face pressed into my jacket, and the force of it nearly knocked me back a step. I caught her bent over her, wrapped both arms around her, and held on with the specific desperate grip of a man who has been reaching for something for 4 days and has finally closed his hand around it. She was shaking. Her whole body was trembling, fine, continuous, the shaking of someone who has been cold and frightened for a very long time. Her hair was tangled against my chin. She smelled like dust and old canvas and something faintly sweet, like the fruit snacks Helena always kept in the kitchen drawer. "I've got you," I said into the top of her head. My eyes were burning over, and I did not try to stop them. "I've got you. You're safe. I've got you." "I wrote your name," she said, voice muffled against my jacket, words coming out between ragged, hiccuping sobs. "On the paper. I thought if I wrote it, maybe you'd know to look." "I knew," I said. "I always knew, little compass. I was always coming." She cried harder. I held her tighter. Somewhere to my left, Rebecca Sloan stood with her arms crossed watching us, with an expression that was professionally neutral except around the eyes. Cole Varick sat against the far wall, with his hands zip-tied in front of him and a federal agent standing over him. He was not looking at the agents. He was looking at Avery, and his face exhausted, hollowed out, carrying something that had no clean name, was the face of a man settling a debt he did not know how to pay. As I straightened up with Avery still pressed against my side, I felt something fall against my foot. I looked down. A piece of paper folded twice, slightly crumpled, had slipped from the pocket of the oversized jacket she was wearing. It had landed face up on the concrete floor. 4 words in crayon in the careful block printing of a child who wanted to be very clearly understood. Grandpa fined me. I picked it up with the hand that wasn't holding Avery and stood there in a warehouse in Port Chester at 5:24 in the morning, and I could not speak for a moment. Not because I had nothing to say, because some things are too complete to require words. Nolan appeared at the entrance behind me. He looked at Avery, then at me, and his jaw moved. He nodded once, the nod of a soldier who has completed the mission that mattered most. The EMTs were outside with a stretcher and a blanket, and Rebecca guided us gently toward the exit, with a hand that was more human than professional. Avery would not let go of my hand, not even for the 30 seconds it took to get her onto the gurney, and I sat beside her in the ambulance with her fingers locked around 2 of mine, and her eyes tracking the ceiling of the vehicle as it pulled away from the port. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to lighten, the first thin gray of dawn over the water, spreading slowly like something being carefully uncovered. Avery stared upward for a long time. Her breathing was evening out. The shaking had mostly stopped. The blanket was pulled up to her chin. Then, in a voice so small I had to lean down to catch it, she asked, "Is Mommy coming?" I looked at her face, this small, trusting face that had carried a secret and written a note, and waited in the dark with complete faith that I would find her. My chest ached with an intensity that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with the answer I did not know how to give her. Greenwich Hospital smelled the way all hospitals smell: antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular institutional quiet of a building that has learned not to react to anything too quickly. I sat in a plastic chair in the corridor, outside the pediatric examination suite, and looked at my hands. They were resting on my knees, and they were trembling slightly, a fine involuntary vibration that I did not notice until Helena sat down beside me and placed her hand over mine, and the contrast between her steadiness and my shaking made it impossible to ignore. "She's going to be all right," Helena said. Not a question, a statement the kind you make when you need the room to accept something as true. "I know," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I know she is." Helena kept her hand where it was. 22 years of this woman knowing exactly what a moment needed. She didn't offer more words because more words would have been the wrong thing. She simply stayed solid and present while the doctor finished inside and the corridor hummed with the ordinary sounds of a building that had no idea what the last 4 days had contained. The pediatric attending came out, 12 minutes later, a calm, efficient woman who delivered her report with the practiced directness of someone who understood that parents and grandparents in these situations needed facts, not softening. "No physical injuries," she said. "Mild dehydration, some fatigue. Her vitals are completely normal. Emotionally, she's going to need time and professional support, but there's nothing here that won't heal." She looked at me steadily. "She kept asking for you. Every time I checked on her, the first thing she said was your name." I pressed my lips together hard and nodded. "Can I go in? Give us 5 more minutes." I sat back down. Helena squeezed my hand once and released it. I pulled out my phone and checked the time, 8:47 in the morning. Across the city in a federal building in Lower Manhattan, a man named Cole Varick was sitting in an interview room making a decision. Rebecca called at 9:12. "He talked," she said, without preamble. No attorney, no negotiation. He asked to make a statement, and he made one. I stood up from the chair and walked to the end of the corridor away from the foot traffic. "Tell me." "I'm going to read you what he said, because I want you to hear it exactly." A brief sound of paper. Then Rebecca's voice reading in the careful flat tone of someone conveying information without editorializing. He said, and I'm quoting, "Caleb Mercer paid for the first video and arranged the initial setup at the Lake House property. Rowan Blackwell's organization provided the secondary location and the logistics for the transfer. Vivian Cross built the legal documents. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she'd done versions of it before, And Adrian Crowe. A pause. Adrian Crowe wanted Gideon Vale broken, not outmaneuvered, not pressured, broken. He specifically said the girl was the only thing that would do it. The corridor felt very narrow. I put one hand against the wall. Cole said that. My voice was low. He volunteered that. Every word, Rebecca said. He also provided corroborating detail on the timeline, the communications chain, and the financial transfers from Caleb's account. Combined with the tracker evidence and the metadata Clara Whitaker documented, we have more than sufficient probable cause. A beat. Arrest warrants were signed 40 minutes ago. Caleb Mercer, Rowan Blackwell, Adrian Crowe, Vivian Cross. All four are in federal custody or being taken into custody as we speak. I close my eyes for 3 seconds. 40 years of building something. 4 days of watching it nearly be taken apart by people I had trusted. And now, in a hospital corridor with my hand pressed against a wall, it was over. Thank you, Rebecca, I said. Thank your attorney, and whoever sent us that GPS coordinate. A brief pause, and I thought I heard something human in her voice for just a moment. Go see your granddaughter, Mr. Vale. I ended the call. My phone buzzed immediately. Elliot. It's done, he said. Just those 2 words in the voice of a man who had been awake for 36 hours and was finally setting something down. It's done, I repeated. Go be with her. Elliot said. Everything else can wait until Monday. I put the phone in my pocket and stood in that corridor for a moment, thinking about Adrian Crowe. 15 years across a conference table. 15 years of trust I had not given lightly to a man I had genuinely believed was my closest professional ally, and perhaps something closer to a friend. And underneath all of it, for years before I had seen any sign of it, something had been growing resentment, injury, the slow accumulation of grievances that a proud man does not express and therefore does not release. I had given him a quiet exit. I had been merciful. And he had used the decade of that mercy to build the machinery that would be used against a 9-year-old girl. I did not understand it. I was not sure I ever would. The doctor opened the suite door and nodded to me. I walked in. Avery was sitting up on the examination table in a hospital gown, her tangled hair loose around her face, a cup of apple juice in both hands that she was working through with the focused dedication of someone who has been thirsty for a long time. She looked up when I came in, and her whole face changed, not the explosive relief of the warehouse reunion, but something quieter and more permanent. The look of someone who has confirmed that a thing they believed is actually true. Grandpa. She held both arms out, juice cup still in one hand. I crossed the room and hugged her, carefully mindful of the monitoring lead still attached to her arm, and she pressed her face into my shoulder and made a sound that was half laugh and half the remnants of a cry she had apparently not finished yet. You still smell the same, she said, muffled against my jacket. I laughed, a short, rough sound that surprised me completely. Is that good? It's really good, she said firmly. That evening I drove to the Greenwich Police Department's satellite facility, where Brielle was being held for voluntary questioning, pending formal arraignment. I told the duty officer my name. He made a call. 3 minutes later, I was escorted to a waiting area outside the interview wing. Brielle was sitting in a plastic chair against the far wall. Her lawyer, a man I did not recognize, was seated beside her, with a briefcase open on his knees, speaking quietly. She looked up when I came through the door, and her lawyer stopped mid-sentence. I sat down in the chair directly across from her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The room smelled of bad coffee and carpet that had been cleaned too many times. On my way out of the hospital, Elliot had texted me a single line, Brielle retained counsel at 4 p.m. Name is Daniel Forsyth, Criminal Defense, Hartford. I had read it, pocketed the phone, and kept walking. She had every right to a lawyer. I was glad she had one. It meant what came next would at least be on record. For the first time in 4 days, my daughter and I were looking directly at each other with nothing left between us. The waiting area of the Greenwich Police Department satellite facility had 12 plastic chairs, a vending machine in the corner that offered 4 kinds of bad coffee and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were recovering from something. The carpet was the particular shade of institutional gray that had probably been chosen because it would not show stains. I had been in a room like this once before, a long time ago. Brielle was 15, furious at a girl at school who had said something cutting about Eleanor's illness, and the fight had been bad enough that the school had called the police. I had driven to the station, walked into a room very much like this one, and found my daughter sitting in a plastic chair with a split lip, and her arms crossed and her chin up, in a way that told me she was not sorry and had no intention of becoming sorry. I had sat down beside her and said, "Are you hurt?" She had said she deserved it. I had taken her home anyway. I had always taken her home. This time, I sat down across from her, not beside, across. The distance between those two positions was not measurable in feet. Brielle's lawyer started to rise. "Mr. Vale," I'd advise, "give us a few minutes," I said. He looked at Brielle. She gave a short, tight nod, and he settled back with the practiced neutrality of an attorney who has learned to read rooms. He opened a folder and studied it with the focused attention of a man who was absolutely still listening to every word. Brielle looked at me. Her eyes were swollen, the skin beneath them, the bruised purple of someone who had not slept in days. Her hair was pulled back, a detail that struck me, because Brielle never appeared in public without her hair. Done it was one of the small armors she had always worn. Without it, she looked younger. She looked for a moment like the girl I remembered from before the ambition had fully taken over the face. "I don't know how to start," she said. "Then don't," I said. "Just answer what I ask." She pressed her lips together. Her hands were in her lap, twisting against each other, a nervous habit she had had since she was 7 years old. "Did Avery know she was in danger?" Brielle's jaw worked. Her eyes filled. "She wasn't supposed to be." "That's not what I asked." "Dad, did she know," I said carefully, "at any point during those 4 days that the people around her intended her harm?" Brielle's chin dropped to her chest. Her shoulders shook once hard. When she looked up, her eyes were streaming. "No, she thought—" Her voice broke. She pressed the back of her hand hard against her mouth, composing herself with visible effort. "She thought it was temporary. She thought she was helping. I told her it was a surprise, that if she just stayed quiet for a few days, everything would be fixed and the family would be okay. You told a 9-year-old girl," I said, "that the survival of this family depended on her performance." Brielle flinched like I had struck her across the face. "That's not—" "That is exactly what you did." My voice was not raised. It was very, very level in the way that only happens when something is past the point of heat. She left a voicemail for Father Brennan, asking if pretending long enough would make me forgive you. She wrote my name on a piece of paper in a warehouse and left it where I might find it, because some part of her understood that what was happening was not a game anymore, even if she couldn't say so. I leaned forward slightly. "She was 9 years old, Brielle. She was 9 years old, and she was trying to save you." Brielle broke completely. The sound she made was not elegant. It was the raw, heaving cry of someone whose defenses have failed all at once, shoulders caving inward, hands covering her face. The ugly, particular grief of a person confronting something they cannot justify or minimize or explain away. Her lawyer shifted in his chair but said nothing. I waited. I did not reach for her. I waited because she needed to feel the full weight of it, and because I was not sure if I reached for her, that I would be doing it for her sake or for my own need to believe she was still the person I had always wanted her to be. When the crying had subsided enough for speech, she lifted her face. Her eyes were raw, and red-rimmed mascara completely gone, the careful professional surface entirely stripped. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "I swear to you, I didn't know Rowan would. I didn't know Adrian was involved. I didn't know any of it would. But you opened the door," I said. She went very still. "You opened the door, and you let people in who you did not control to accomplish something you wanted badly enough to use your own daughter to get it." I stood up slowly. "That's the truth of it, Brielle. That's what happened." She shot up from her chair and grabbed my hand with both of hers, fingers clamping around mine with the desperate grip of someone going under. Her whole body was shaking. "Dad, please, please don't—" Her voice climbed and cracked. "Please don't leave. Please don't walk out of this room and not come back. Please, I know what I did. I know, but please don't." I looked down at her hands wrapped around mine. These hands, I had held them in the delivery room when she was born, had held them crossing streets when she was small, had held them at her mother's funeral 3 years ago, while she shook with a grief that felt at the time like the purest thing she was capable of. I thought of Avery's hand in mine 6 hours ago, small and certain in the back of an ambulance. "I spent 40 years building something," I said. My voice was very quiet. "I built it with the intention of leaving it to you when the time came. Not because it was tradition, not because it was expected, but because I believed you were capable of carrying it with the same values I tried to carry it with. I felt Brielle's grip tighten her breath, coming in jagged pulls. And you spent 1 week dismantling everything I believed about you, including your daughter's trust in the one person in the world who was supposed to protect her above everything else. I gently but completely freed my hand from hers. I will make sure you have a good lawyer, I said, the best available. I will make sure you are treated fairly through this process. I looked at her face, my daughter's face still so familiar, still carrying traces of the girl I had loved without reservation for 42 years. But I cannot give you more than that, not right now. I'm sorry. Brielle pressed both hands over her mouth. Her legs buckled, and she sat back down hard in the plastic chair's shoulders, heaving the sound of her crying, following me out the door and down the hallway and through the building entrance until the heavy glass door closed behind me and the night air swallowed it. I stood on the sidewalk outside the police facility. The sky above Greenwich was a flat, starless October. Black clouds had come in from the coast, low and featureless. The street was empty except for a cab idling at the corner and the distant sound of a freight train somewhere east. I stood there for a long time, breathing the cold air, letting it go in and out, and not asking it to do more than that. Then I called Helena. "Is Avery still awake?" I asked. Helena's voice warm and immediate. "She's been asking for you, every 20 minutes since they brought her home. Helena said I should call, but I wanted to wait until you were ready." I felt something in my chest unknot slowly, like a rope that has been wet and tight for days finally being given room to loosen. "I'm on my way," I said. January arrives in Connecticut without ceremony. No announcement, no dramatic shift. Just a morning when you step outside and the cold has settled into something permanent rather than provisional. The trees are bare in a way that no longer looks temporary, and the sky has gone the particular flat white of a season that has committed to itself. I drove to the Vale Meridian offices on a Tuesday morning in early January 2025 with the heat running in the car and Eleanor's letter folded in my inside jacket pocket, where it had been every day since October. The building felt different than it had for 40 years. Not empty, the staff were at their desks, the phones were running. The quarterly numbers Elliot had been shepherding through the transition period were holding steady. But a place mid-transformation carries its own specific atmosphere. The way a house feels different after you have decided what to do with it and before the doing is complete. Clara was waiting in the conference room on the 32nd floor. 3 stacks of documents arranged with her characteristic precision. A pen placed at the exact center of the first page. 6 years of working together, and she had never once handed me something out of sequence. "Good morning, Mr. Vale," she said. "Everything's ready." Elliot was already seated, jacket on, reading glasses in place, a coffee in front of him. He had probably been nursing for an hour. He looked up when I came in. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready," I said, and I meant it in a way I had not meant a single word in the last 3 months. I sat down and picked up the pen. The first document was the majority stake transfer, 63% of Vale Meridian Group's founding shares redirected to the Evelyn Vale Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to educational access programs throughout the Northeast. It was what I had announced at the beginning of the previous year. It was what someone had decided to stop me from doing. Nobody was stopping me now. "This makes the foundation the controlling shareholder," Elliot said as I moved the pen to the signature line. "The board structure ensures no single individual can reverse this transfer without a supermajority vote. It's as permanent as anything legal can be, Gideon." "Good," I said, and signed. Clara turned to the second stack without a word. The second document was the Avery Mercer Irrevocable Trust, a protected financial structure holding a designated portion of my personal assets for Avery's education, housing, and long-term security, with me named as sole trustee until she turned 25. Under American trust law, an irrevocable trust cannot be undone by anyone, including the person who created it. Whatever the courts produced over the coming months, whatever Brielle's criminal proceedings determined, whatever family court eventually formalized, this portion of Avery's future was beyond the reach of all of it. "Temporary legal guardianship is concurrent with this," Elliot said carefully. "Family court signed the order in December. You are Avery's primary guardian legally and formally until the court makes a determination on parental rights following Brielle's proceedings." He paused. "Brielle's trial date is confirmed for March." I know," I said. I signed the second document. Clara gathered both signed sets, organized them into their folders with quiet efficiency, and slid one copy of each across the table to me. Then she looked up, not in her usual assistant's way, but in the direct way of a person acknowledging something that goes beyond the professional. "It was an honor to be part of this, Mr. Vale," she said. "What you built and what you protected." I looked at her across the table. "Thank you, Clara, for everything in October, all of it." She nodded, once pressed her lips briefly together in the manner of someone who has decided not to cry in a conference room, and returned to gathering her materials with great focus. I stood, shook Elliot's hand, and held it a moment longer than the customary duration. 18 years, a lot of difficult rooms. He nodded, and I picked up my copies and left. The house in Cos Cob was not the estate. Eleanor and I had talked about returning to it for years, the 2-story colonial on the tree-lined street, white clapboard and green shutters. The kitchen window that caught the afternoon light. The porch that belonged to no one but the two of us in the early years, before everything became large and complicated. We had simply run out of time to do it together. I had done it without her. It was not the same thing, but it was not nothing. Helena had the house warm when I came through the door that afternoon, something baking in the oven. Her answer to most situations that required steadiness and the low winter light was coming through the kitchen window, at that particular January angle that turns a plain room briefly gold before the sun drops below the tree line. Avery was at the kitchen table. She was bent over a large piece of paper crayons, spread in a semicircle around her tongue, slightly between her teeth, the way she concentrated on things that mattered. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and something in her face settled, not the explosive joy of the warehouse, not the quiet relief of the hospital, but something more deliberate, the look of someone confirming that a thing they had decided to believe is still true. "Grandpa," she waved her crayon toward the chair beside her. "Come look." I set my briefcase down, shrugged off my coat, and sat beside her. She turned the paper toward me. A house, small 2 stories, a porch, a tree in the yard, with leaves she had given it generously, despite the bare branches visible through the window behind her. 2 figures beside the house, one tall, one small. The tall one's arm curved around the small one's shoulders. And in the lower corner, drawn in careful dark blue strokes, a small compass, 8 points a single arrow, pointing steadily toward the house. I looked at it for a long time. "Where does the compass point?" I asked. Avery looked up at me. Her eyes held mine for a moment, brown and wide, still, carrying at their edges the faint shadow of things a child her age should not have had to carry. Then the corners of her mouth turned upward, slowly, on purpose. "Home," she said. I placed my hand on her shoulder and did not say anything more. The compass was pointing. The house was there. Outside the kitchen window, the January snow lay smooth and unbroken in the last of the afternoon light, and somewhere in another room, Helena moved quietly, and the oven ticked with something almost ready. It was not a perfect ending, but the compass was pointing home. And for today, for this specific, ordinary, irreplaceable Tuesday in January, that was enough. People ask me what I learned from all of this, from the lies, the documents, the ransom video, the 4 days I didn't know if Avery was alive. I'll tell you what I learned. I learned that wealth without wisdom is just a loaded gun pointed at the people you love most. I spent 40 years building Vale Meridian revenue reports, board meetings, acquisition calls at midnight, and the whole time I thought providing was the same as protecting. It isn't. Not even close. A priest I respect once told me, God doesn't ask how much you built. He asks who you went home to. I didn't understand that until I was standing outside a warehouse at 5 in the morning, waiting to hear my granddaughter's voice. In that moment, I would have burned every share, every contract, every building with my name on it, just to hear her say, "Grandpa." So here is my advice from a 73-year-old man who almost lost everything because he was too busy winning. Don't be like me. Don't wait for a crisis to prove what matters. Don't assume the people around your table love you check. Don't sign documents you haven't read, and don't trust loyalty you never earned. And if someone in your family is struggling, broken, or desperate, see them before the world does. This is what family revenge stories never show you. The damage isn't always done by enemies. Sometimes it starts at your own dinner table. If these family stories' revenge themes hit close to home, drop a comment below. Tell me what you think. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, This is your moment because the stories ahead will go even deeper. Thank you for staying until the very last word. It means more than you know. A heads up for what's ahead. Some of the stories coming up contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and education. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Step away, find what fits. But if you're staying, buckle up.